So this is the continuation of the conversation we're having on the current experience with nations, what's happening in the prophetic timeline, Great Awakening, Elijah, the new wine, and joy. We're hearing a lot of that. And I believe that putting that all into a context is important. So Mercedes Sparks has been, part of our organization, our program. She's the one that really was pushing me on drilling down on this subject, because I run through this pretty quickly. I'll do like a stair step. I'll probably do that today, where we just kind of look at the various stages of what the template is, because the pattern that's in the Bible is the pattern we're locked in right now. Yeah. And if the pattern was true then, and the pattern is true now, then we can actually predict what comes in the next stage. So, but then she said, well, I heard you say all this, but it just is, in clarifying it, I realized you have to slow down a little bit, and makes more sense if you take it in chunks rather than in an overview. So I said, well, I want you to join the program, and we'll slow it down, and we'll just kind of drill down like we do when we're talking about this stuff off the camera.
Sure. Well, honestly, I don't know what the Lord wanted, but He was talking to me about what you normally talk about all the time. And so I was reading through Jeremiah. I was reading through Nehemiah is really where it started, which I really enjoy Nehemiah. And so I just this light bulb goes off, and it's like, whoa, wait a minute, Jeremiah prophesied 70 years. And so I called you, I don't know, it was like 9 o'clock or whatever. And I'm like, Lance, you won't believe it. This prophecy happened hundreds of years before, and he prophesied 70 years. And literally hundreds of years before, he prophesied Cyrus, and then Cyrus makes the decree. This is amazing. And you're like, do you listen when I teach? And I was like, yeah, I guess. But that's where this came out of for me, is that I think a lot of people don't, and I listen to you all the time, I don't think people understand the timeline. And really, because you've done 2 broadcasts, I've been here listening to you do the broadcasts, and I don't think people understand just how it's all weaved together. And I think that there's something that's very powerful about who God is, the nature of God, the character of God, that ends up getting revealed in the midst of really slowing down and going from where you really left off with the prophecy of Isaiah, and then Jeremiah, and then Daniel seeing the actual prophecy that Jeremiah does. And we doodled this whole timeline for you, and Lance doodled a timeline. But to me, I think that's the really powerful part, and I wanted to slow it down just a little bit so you could talk through that.
All right, so let's take a look at without putting the dates in. We'll show you another timeline. It's a little more in detail, but to catch it, then I think this is really powerful. We just draw a line, like this is going to be the line of time. And the first thing is you have Isaiah comes along. And Isaiah prophesies, and you'll see this in Isaiah 43, 44, and 45. He's talking about, as prophets do, the future of what's coming. Yeah. And what he does that's amazing is he reaches 120 years into the future. Now this is kind of like, how do you judge a prophet, whether the word's true or not, when it's 120 years in the future? Yeah. Not easy. But Isaiah had that gift. So Isaiah prophesies and says, there is coming one who will be Cyrus. He's going to shepherd my people. Now Isaiah does the prophecy. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, after him, and this is so cool, and this is the part that I think really is neat, you're going to love this, is that in the chronology of time, the next guy that comes along is Jeremiah, not Cyrus. Mm. And so Jeremiah prophesies to wicked kings. So you've got Isaiah has the benefit of talking to kings that were like Hezekiah, and he's got some decent guys he's got to work with. Uzziah. Anyway, the kings of Judah that are worth prophesying to, I think I've got here Hezekiah, Ahaz, Uzziah. But then you've got Jeremiah comes along, and it starts off with a good king. And then it goes downhill from there, Jehoiakim and Zedekiah. These are the guys that God's going to judge. So Jeremiah says, look, you're going to end up, for 70 years, you're going to be in Babylon. And they put him in a pit. They said, we don't even want to hear that. I mean, Isaiah had better prophecies than you. Yours are miserable. Well, Jeremiah ends up being right. And so the verses for this, the Isaiah verses, I think you guys might know of. Cyrus is my shepherd, and I'm going to open for him. That's why I love the Isaiah 45 for Donald Trump, because they're Cyrus prophecies. But what do we have for Jeremiah?
Yeah, I just found it here. So in Jeremiah 25, he's talking about the 70 years. So this is Jeremiah 25:12. And so it says, "Then after the 70 years are completed, I will punish the king of Babylon and that nation and the land of the Chaldeans, okay, for their iniquity, declares the Lord, making the land an everlasting waste. I will bring upon that land all the words that I've uttered against it," everything written in this book which Jeremiah prophesied against the nations. And so this for me was like that aha, like, oh my goodness, it's 70 years. Because this will really blow your mind about the character of God and who he is. I mean, it just blew mine thinking about Isaiah prophesying Cyrus 120 years before he's even brought into power. But the reason he's brought into power is to judge the nation of Israel. You're talking about an entire generation that the Lord knew would sin against him, wander from him, and then he's going to declare judgment on them. I mean, for me, that was crazy. But not only judgment, but then also restoration. And then he's going to administer it through a non-Jewish king, through Cyrus, who he's going to bring into power. So for me, that really like blew my mind.
And it is kind of an unusual thing when you look at this, because Daniel comes along as our next entry in the cast of characters. So Daniel, now what we've got so far is Isaiah the prophet prophesies. Jeremiah says, well, you guys are going to be in a 70-year timeout. And at the end of the 70 years, Daniel is praying. And I love this verse, so let's just slow down and take it in. And Daniel is in chapter 9, so we'll go to Daniel chapter 9. And as Daniel is there in verse 2, he says, in the first year of the reign of his reign, referring to Darius, Daniel understood by the books the number of the years specified by the word of the Lord through Jeremiah the prophet. This is so cool. So Daniel is now reading the prophet Jeremiah to see what God was going to accomplish. And it speaks about 70 years in the desolations of Jerusalem. Then I set my face toward the Lord God to make request by prayer and supplication with fasting and sackcloth and ashes. Now what's interesting here is Daniel is reading prophetic words that were written by a contemporary. So here's an interesting little tidbit. Jeremiah and Daniel actually overlapped. Jeremiah was an old man who was allowed to go back to his land. And it's funny because you'd think Jeremiah would be the guy birthing the prophecy. It's like he gave it, now it's time to go pray. The Lord says, forget it. You did your job. You're an old man. Take a break. Daniel's job is to pray. So Daniel gets into serious prayer over the prophecy that was given by Jeremiah. And it says here, he sets his face and he begins to pray about identifying with the failures of his generation, which is an interesting disposition, because you might think you're frustrated, but actually Daniel as an intercessor identified with where the generation went off. But what's curious to me is around verse 20. You guys want to take a look at this. In verse 20, Gabriel, while I was speaking and praying, confessing my sins, and presenting my supplication, while I was speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision at the beginning, was caused to fly swiftly and reach me and inform me and talk with me and to give me skill and understanding. That this is wild, because what it tells you is that when you go about engaging the prophetic as Daniel did, you're actually engaging spiritual forces in the heavenlies to birth that prophecy. And the angel breaks through, bam, and says, I have come from the beginning of your supplication, the command went out. And I have come to tell you, for you're greatly beloved. Notice something. At the very beginning of Daniel's prayer, Gabriel was sent. But you'll find that he'll reveal in a later chapter, angelic activity gets resisted when it's coming through. This is why perseverance, this is why endurance, this is why knocking and persisting is there. It's not because you're persuading God. Actually, the moment that you set your feet, the moment he started, the answer was on its way. But Daniel had to stay in a position to bring the manifestation in. And this happens more than once in this book. So Daniel actually bursts this thing. But what's curious about this is the moment the angel comes, what does the angel bring with him? Understanding. And that's a wild idea. It means that when you get a breakthrough prophetically, you get an augmented, upgraded perception of the next prophetic course of events. It's like you've done that, now the curtains are parted and you can actually see the next chapter. And Daniel gets a 490-year prophecy.
Wow.
And he starts to see, boom, all the way to the Messiah coming.
That's very interesting. I love that. And then what does this mean here, Lance, where later on in Daniel 9, where it says in 25, know therefore and understand, well, actually, we can go in 24. 70 weeks are declared about your people in the holy city. Is that, the finish the transgression, is that also tied into the 70 years?
Yeah, so 70 weeks are determined. And this is where you really get into some interesting prophetic chronology, because 70 weeks will actually be a total of 70 times 7. So it's going to be 7 days or in a week, 70 weeks. And so the angel is actually giving Daniel a timeline for what's about to happen. The total is going to be 70 weeks of 7 days. So that's going to be 490 years are going to be determined for your people and for your city. And that would be, so think about this. If you were alive when the time that Jesus came, why was it that there were people that, and this is so strange, when Herod was searching for the child that was born, there were wise men that actually were prophesying it was the timing for the birth. They were doing it off of Daniel's prophecy.
Wow.
So they knew something was going to happen, and they were watching for it. And here he comes. So Jesus shows up literally in that 490-year period. And then there's this elusive 7-day period that has always been the unfulfilled part of this, which is where you get a lot of your last days teaching about a 7-year period and such as that. But the simple answer is Daniel is given the preview all the way down to the return of the Messiah. And there shall be, it says in verse 25, 7 weeks and 62 weeks. And what's going to happen in the 7 weeks? This is so important. 7 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall in a troublesome time. 7 weeks is going to be 49 years. That's Nehemiah will build the wall in 49 years. So the prophet is given, this is when the Messiah comes. But a critical piece of this is going to be when the walls are built around Jerusalem. So the building of boundaries, the restoration of boundaries around God's people is a critical part of God's fulfilling his promise. So literally right there in verse 25, Nehemiah is prophesied roughly 49 years before the command is going to come for him to build the wall. Wow. And it will be built when? In a troublesome time. And I don't want to jump too crazy on this, but right now we're talking about building a wall, and it's in a time of trouble.
Yeah, definitely. So what I love what we're doing, what verse is that too, in case people want to follow along at home?
That's chapter 9 of Daniel, verse 25.
Okay, great. So we're jumping around too because just how the Bible's written, but this is like a chronological flow we're going through.
Yeah, and you could see on this illustration here, I mean, this is the reason why I wanted to write this out, because Daniel comes along. And then after Daniel comes along, we're going to see some other characters. It's going to be Ezra returning, and then Nehemiah. Now, Nehemiah was prophesied. I just showed you where Daniel got the prophecy on Nehemiah, and it's going to be in like 49 years. Wow. Nehemiah's going to show up. But for that to happen, Cyrus has to take place. So what happens is Cyrus comes in, boom, makes the decree. And then out of that decree, Ezra makes his trip, first phase. Ezra comes in, and we'll slow down and go there, to build the house of God. And then Nehemiah comes in order to restore the wall and the boundaries around the nation. If this is a timeline, prophetically, Mercedes, if this is a timeline, then what we have right now is we have prophets that have prophesied. We have a transition of a new administration, Cyrus, literally, a modern-day Cyrus, 70-year period, which is the number of years Israel's been a nation.
Sure.
Cyrus comes. Where we are now is the timeline for being able to press into the warfare so that we can really get the revival and the awakening in the house that can restore the boundaries of a nation.
Yeah.
And this doesn't have to happen. Ezra himself was concerned that his move was going to be a little reviving in the midst of their trouble, meaning a window that would close. And I'm telling you, that's why I want to teach this, because that's what concerns me about America. If what I'm teaching and what I'm saying makes sense to you, it's because it's coming out of a fresh revelation. I believe the Lord's saying that the major game right now isn't 7 mountains of culture, it's not politics, it's not America. It's an assault on sovereign nation states. Literally, you're living in the time when nation states are being attacked. Patriotism, nationalism is actually being branded as fascists. My God, what is happening? Well, what we're covering in our Bible studies, what we're covering in our news broadcasts, what we're covering on social media is the rise and fall of nations. And you're right now on the front lines of a redefinition of the conflict. I don't know if you know it yet. But life on earth is going to be changing over the next 2 to 3 years radically, because nations are rising and falling depending on whether the people of God can exert their influence through a sustained pattern of persuasion to maintain or expand their freedoms and right to exist. Sheep and goat nations are being formed right now. We're in the moment when nation states are rising, and nationalism, patriotism, and the emergence of Cyrus rulers are actually on the front page of the morning news every day, but nobody's given us a language to interpret the template. This series will do it for you. You'll never misunderstand what's happening in the news once you have the rise and fall of nations.
So can we go to Ezra then? You want to go to Ezra? So what I like, some of the things that I highlighted here in Ezra is in Ezra 1, it talks about Cyrus the king, but in 1:2, it says, "Thus says Cyrus king of Persia, the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdom of the earth, and he has charged me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judea." But here's what I thought was so interesting is that, and I want you to talk about him reading the prophecy.
Right.
So Cyrus is not a Jewish king, yet he is familiar with the prophecy, because now he's saying the God of heaven has charged me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is a kind of a strange thing when you think about that too, because he's normally charged Jewish kings to build him his house and his temple, and now he's charged a non-Christian king to do that. But talk about him knowing about that prophecy.
All right, so think about this for a second. Daniel prays through what we already found out was Jeremiah's prophecy. But when Cyrus comes to power, it's during the days of Daniel. We know that because I could show you where, like chapter 10 and 11, it starts off with, "And in the first year of Cyrus's reign, I was doing this." So Daniel was present in the transition of power to Cyrus. And here's what Josephus, the historian, says about this. He says that Daniel went to Cyrus and showed him the prophecy of Isaiah 120 years earlier, and showed him the ancient scroll that said, "Cyrus is my shepherd. I'm going to dry up the river," which is how militarily Cyrus got in, "and I'm going to open to him the 2-leaved doors, and I'm going to give him unprecedented success." And so when Cyrus saw that, he immediately allowed the decree to go forth for the Jewish people, because he figured, well, this is a decent religion. And it's interesting, the Cyrus cuneiform, or the Cyrus, back then, they didn't have papers, so they would inscribe on tablets or clay, and they would write in a circle. And so in the Cyrus cone, which they found, Cyrus makes his decree. They have the decrees.
Wow.
They have records of this. They have records of his self-description as a ruler who, get this, restored the economic stability of the people so that their houses of worship, so that they were not, and it was referring to all the religions, restored religious prosperity, and eradicated the terror of other nations.
Well, it's interesting because it sounds like religious freedom. Doesn't that sound like religious freedom?
That's exactly what it is.
That's crazy. When you think about today and what we're at war with today.
It's crazy.
That's crazy.
No, it is. It's there. So
I tell you, it blows my mind every time. Like when we go through it.
I know, it gives you goosebumps because the decree was eradicating terrorism or foreign threats, which there are no foreign threats in the time that Trump is in office, by the way. That none that can be none that can do anything. Economic flourishing and religious freedom. Those are the three things that he was proud of. So the decree goes forth. But let's stop and look at this, because you're in where? Are you in Ezra? Look at chapter 1, verse 1, because this is so exciting. In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah was fulfilled. And the Lord did what? He stirred the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation. And I'm not reluctant to say that proclamation, I'm going to use a different pen here, that the proclamation in the era of Donald Trump, in this 70th year of Israel's existence, had to do with the embassy and the moving of the embassy, and then further, right during the Feast of Purim. This stuff is amazing. Right during the Feast of Purim, the Israel feast that has to deal with the survival of the Jews in Babylon. Because after, in the timeline of things, what comes along after Daniel is going to be the whole story of Esther and the survival of the Jews in Persia. And so, but Donald Trump, and this is the reason why we pray and we honor and we understand the battle that he's in. His decree for the temple, or for the restoration of the embassy in Jerusalem, is the parallel to Cyrus's decree to the Jews to solidify their presence back in their homeland so that they could rebuild their house and restore their boundaries and protection in their wall.
Interesting.
It's all right there. And it's Ezra 1:1. I mean, it literally says it.
Well, and I just want to come back to what you just said a second ago, because when you just said Cyrus did three things, to me, like you talked about in other broadcasts too, but the idea that Donald Trump is a Cyrus type, it's an archetype, and we see, in Brazil, there's like the Trump of the tropics that was just elected, and in different parts of the world, we see a lot of Cyrus types coming to power. So then will you just say one more time, because you said it really quick, and then I started thinking about it, but it's three things. It's economic flourishing, it's a protection of religious freedom, and I feel like you said one more.
That's very important, yeah. And these are three characteristics of the Cyrus anointing. It protects Israel and Christianity. You look at Viktor Orban in Hungary. You look at, and the amazing thing is, it's in Brazil. It's happening in different nations of the world. They restore the walls. They are not willing to surrender their sovereignty like the entire European Union. They are the Brexit people, actually. They want to maintain their independence from the system. They don't want to be a brick in Babylon's wall. They want to be a living stone with their own unique patriotism and their own expression. So it's economic flourishing, it's the restoration of boundaries and the protection of their geography, and it's the flourishing of the economy so that the people can be blessed. Yeah, I like that. Those are the characteristics of
religious freedom, though.
Religious freedom. Religious freedom, economic flourishing, and the restoration of the boundaries.
That's good.
So
very interesting.
The important thing right now is that anti-patriotism, anti-Americanism, and this whole threading and this Jezebel witchcraft that is coming through media, that is trying to undo the United States' sovereign borders and boundaries and disrupt our ability to survive as a nation. That is the same spirit that was trying to keep the Jews from doing their job. So if you look at Ezra, when you go down there, in chapter 3, they have this, as worship is restored in Jerusalem, it says, and there was the first wave, and the first wave is going to be Zerubbabel, and he's the first name that you'll see come up, which is important because there's a lot of Zerubbabels out there right now that are government people and business people who are.
What does that mean, though? When you say Zerubbabel, like Zerubbabel types?
So in the sequence of the return to the nation, back to Israel, what you have is Zerubbabel is the first guy, and he was a governor of Judah, which means that his family was actually dispossessed from political authority because of the rebellion of his fathers. Okay. But in a beautiful way of grace, God turns around, and instead of cutting off, as he had prophesied, the whole line of kings, he said, tell you what I'm going to do. You're going to be the first wave of the political dynasty that fulfills my messianic purpose. So forget about the secular role. You're going to be the governor of restoration and territory over Jerusalem. So when they go back, he is the governor of Judah with a remnant. And then there is the high priest, Jonathan, who goes with him. And they go back, and they're like 50,000 or so. They're the first remnant of the awakening. But something happens, Mercedes. Verse 3 says, though fear had come upon them, because the people of those countries, this is Ezra 3:3, fear came upon Zerubbabel and his brethren because of the people of those countries. They set the altars on its bases. They overturned their offerings, both morning and evening. They also kept the Feast of Tabernacles. They observed their feast. They offered their burnt offerings. But what happens, if you look at in the continuity of what takes place, the fear and the persecution actually caused them to stop the work and the project. So if you go to chapter 4 of Ezra, take a look at this, verse 1. When the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard that the descendants of the captivity were building the temple of the Lord God of Israel, they came to Zerubbabel and the heads of the fathers. First, they said, let us join you and we'll build with you. And I don't want to always date myself here. This is like when Brennan and Comey were trying to get agents embedded in the Trump campaign. We got to keep praying this stuff comes out. They wanted to get agents embedded because embedded agents could open up fault lines so that they could have basically set them up, like they did with Papadopoulos, set them up to be guilty of collusion.
Well, and here's the thing with the devil, right? Like, he's never original. Like, he uses the same schemes over and over again. So this could have been written thousands of years ago, and he's still trying to do the same thing with it.
While they're trying to build. And it's a remnant. So you're by yourself. Not everybody's cheering you on. But here's what I want you to catch, verse 4 and 5. What are the three things that we're running to right now in what the president, we got to pray off of all the people that are patriots right now. Discouragement. And the people of the land, the deep state, you could say, that were in the land. They tried to discourage the people of Judah. They troubled them. They kept bringing them before them with subpoenas and cross-examinations and negative media. Threats in order to, look at these three words. So we have to pray constantly for those people that are in government service called by God, that they are not discouraged, that the enemy does not succeed in the torment of trouble, and that they're not frustrated in their purposes.
Well, and like where you started off a couple broadcasts ago, I mean, that's witchcraft. You know, it's manipulative, it's controlling. And so I know you're talking macro, but man, I've been in different jobs or known friends, and all of a sudden this stuff starts to come out. It's the same type of thing. It's like whatever's going to work for you.
The accuser of the brethren, and it's so obvious. Look at verse 6. In the reign of Ahasuerus, in the beginning of his reign, they wrote an accusation. So it's to discourage, to trouble, to frustrate, in order to accuse them. To what? To government officials. And that's what happens next. Now they're bringing false accusations. Does that sound like, it's nothing new. It's the spirit. That's why I'm saying we're up against the Antichrist spirit right now.
That's good. Well, we're going to cover that in the next broadcast?
Well, we certainly can, because I know we're running out of time.
Yep.
But here's the good news. Let me give you the upbeat part of this. You end up with verse 24. that thus the work of the house of God ceased. It got stopped. We cannot let the work of restoration and reformation in America stop. But verse 5 says, then God sent a prophet. Now Haggai comes, the son of Iddo, who prophesied, and he helped them. And when God sent the prophet, what the prophet did was he broke the power of this and said, God said, build, and they began to build again. And that's what we're fueling this move now. We cannot delay. All right, so we're going to see you in the next broadcast and go on to the prophetic building process.